Hey guys, coming here with a video for you guys. In today's video, we're going to be comparing the new iPhone 14 Pro with the iPhone 12 mini that was released 2 years ago. So in this video, we're going to talk about the hardware, the software, the battery life, the camera, overall price, and finally try to answer the question if it's worth upgrading from the iPhone 12 mini to the iPhone 12 Pro, or if you're in the market, what are the consideration if you're looking at both of these phones. We'll try to break everything down for you so you can make that decision. So as I mentioned, these phones again are one of the top line phones you can buy. You can actually buy both of the models off Apple direct website. The iPhone 14 Pro, which sells for $999 at the 128 gig, which is the base price, and then you can also get the 12 mini directly from Apple, selling for $599 for 64 gigs. So both phones are still available for purchase. Unlike other models which Apple starts to phase out, the mini is still available. The one thing about the mini is that on the 14 lineup, there is no longer a mini version out there. So 12 mini and 13 mini are the only mini edition out there. So Apple decided to kind of move away from that mini iPhone models, if you will. So that's kind of the one big thing. So holding it side by side physically, as you can see here, you have quite the size difference, and you can just tell by looking at it the screen differences between them. You have a 6.1 inch all OLED display versus a 5.4 inch display. Of course, bigger phone. The mini, like it says, it's going to be smaller, easier on the hand. If you're really small hands, probably easier to hold with a Pro. If you have a decent size medium hand, larger hand, the Pro fits better for you. Also, taking a look at the actual front here, as you'll notice here, of course, you got the top notch here, where on the 12 mini here, that real estate that it takes up is quite a lot versus the dynamic island that's available now on the iPhone 14 Pro. Along with this is the build of this phone. So if you take a turn around and take a look at it, of course, you'll notice here, again, side-by-side comparison, the build of the phones are quite different here. You got the 14 Pro with those three cameras. One is now the main camera, which is 48 megapixel, and then two 12 megapixel camera, and on the 12 mini you just have the two 12 megapixel camera. But in terms of size comparison, you'll see just like that here. Now, one thing we do mention again with the 14 Pro, which we recently unboxed, this is the new deep purple color that it features in, where on the iPhone 12 mini you have quite the choice. You actually have 6 different colors that you can choose the 12 mini from. So color wise, you got the base gold, silver, and space gray for the Pro model, like with every edition of it. But the mini one comes in a little quite the feature when it comes to the color size. And if we take a look at just the overall, as you can see here, side by side comparison, the other big thing you'll notice here between the phones is that the 14 Pro no longer features a SIM card tray. So there is no physical SIM card tray, at least in the US model, but the 12 mini does have the SIM card tray. So what that means is that you have to be using eSIM card, or your carrier has to support eSIM for you to actually use the 14 Pro, which again in the US most carriers now already support the eSIM version, so nothing to worry about there. So now let's dive into a little bit about the phone. We mentioned here both of the phones are quite well built. We do want to mention that on the 14 Pro, it's actually surgical grade stainless steel body build here. So you'll see here these reflective finishes on it, where on our other 12 mini here you have this aerospace grade body build to it. So you'll see here that aluminum body that we have on this as well. So that's kind of the build between these two phones. Again, both phones are pretty good. Both front and back are glass. So if you are taking it without a case, do be mindful that you can crack back or front. Now, the other thing about these phones are both of the phones are water resistant. So you can go ahead and take it up to 6 meters of water for about 30 minutes or so. So that's going to be the take a look at it. So just taking a look at these two phones, as you'll notice here, we looked at the hardware overall build between these two phones. We do want to mention a couple other features coming on the 14 Pro that's not available on the 12 mini is this emergency SOS with satellite. So both of them does have SOS, but the satellite feature will only be available on the 14 Pro, and also the crash detection, which there is extra sensor built into the Pro that allows the phone to automatically detect whenever you're in a crash. It gives you about a counter before it calls the emergency services, which again, a really neat feature which Apple mentioned in their preview quite extensively for the phones here. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the camera. As we mentioned here, physically the camera, you have triple camera versus two camera. What does that mean? Well, not too much here, but just taking a look at it, here the zoom option here you have, we can go up to 15x versus 5x for the actual photography, so you can really go in deep with the camera here. You do have in the video component, you'll notice here, same thing, you go up to 9 times versus only 3 times on the mini here. The other thing I want to take a look at for you guys right here between these two phones right here, especially on the one right here, you'll see this icon right here, which is the action mode. So if you click on it, you'll see this action mode, which basically allows the phone to stabilize a little bit better when it comes to recording and you're on the go or in action, basically running. And then this other feature you'll notice here on the 14 Pro, which again, this is a feature from the 13 Pro as well, is that cinematic mode available as well. So in terms of camera, of course, the camera on the 14 Pro has quite the feature that aren't going to be available on the 12 mini. But again, the 12 mini does take some same level quality of photos, and it does record, both phones do record up to 4K 60 frames per second. Now the other thing I want to mention about frames per second is the display here between the phones. Is that the display refresh rate is quite different between both of these two phones. So you have 120 hertz refresh rate versus 60 hertz refresh rate on the 12 minis. Again, a big difference, but something to mention, especially if you play games and are into gaming. That is one thing you'll probably want to know. Now let's move on to the next thing again, which is going to be the battery life between these two phones. Now battery is a big component when it comes to phone, and you'll find that there's a big difference between these two phones when it comes to battery life. And the big difference between is that on the 14 Pro you have 3200 mAh battery versus only a 2227 mAh battery on the 12 mini. Because the mini is a smaller phone, it houses of course a really smaller battery. So you get on the 14 Pro, in Apple specs they mentioned 23 hours of video playback, which is considered an all-day battery. So on a full single charge, if you're a light to medium user, should be able to get through the whole day on a full single charge. Unfortunately, not quite the same for the 12 mini here. It gets about 15 hours of video playback. So about, if you would say, about 8-hour difference between these two phones, and that's because of that mAh difference between these two phones. Now let's move on to the next part, is the software here. So when it comes to software, both of the phones, you can actually go ahead and download iOS 16, no issues there. We were able to upgrade the 12 mini, which we also did a review video if you guys want to check out, and you'll see you'll be able to take pretty much everything that's included on both of the phones and be able to do much more with the software, because both of the phones, like Apple does, supports the software. So when it comes to software, the update is there, and we started to test out different applications, see how it is. Between these two phones, there is a little bit of performance difference that you'll probably notice, not too big of a difference when it comes to browsing and using the apps. You'll notice here both phones will get the job done for you. There isn't an issue when it comes to doing that. But one thing we noticed between these two phones, again, when it comes to just doing the simple stuff, it will do all that, from your social media to your entertainment purposes to video streaming, all of your everyday app. It does it well, and that's no doubt between these phones, and it shouldn't be a surprise to you because of course both of the phones are pretty relevant in terms of their release and the hardware that they have. And the hardware we're talking about is that A16 Bionic chip and 6 GB of RAM on the 14 Pro versus a 14 Bionic chip and 4 gigs of RAM. So when it comes to even gaming, both of the phones does pretty well when it comes to 2D games, no doubt there. But when it comes to like heavier graphic game and you're really going to be gaming hardcore, this is where the 14 Pro comes in with that extra 2 gig of RAM. This is probably what you're going to be looking at, the Pro, for your heavier graphic game. But for our everyday user, if you're not gaming too much, you'll probably be fine with the 12 mini here. And it comes to pretty much your preferences between what you're looking for in a phone. Now let's go ahead and talk about the last thing between these two phones, is pretty much why you would consider one versus another. We mentioned the price difference is probably the big thing when it comes to both of these phones. You have a $999, which is almost $1,000 for the 14 Pro versus almost $600 for the 12 mini. So $400 difference. Now, this phone is 2 years old, but the price hasn't dropped as much. But if you buy a pre-owned 12 mini, you probably get it under $400 depending on where you get it. We'll leave some link in the description section for you guys to check out cheaper phones to buy or discounted phones for the both of these models here. So let's talk about the 14 Pro. What are you getting out of that, paying that $1,000? Well, you get about, in terms of a couple things here, the camera, right? You have the 3 times the optical zoom. You get a higher refresh rate, that 120 hertz refresh rate. You get a screen size much bigger, 0.7 inch larger screen size. And the battery life, of course, is almost 46% longer than the 12 mini because of that 23 hours versus only 15 hours of it. And then the other thing is that 6 gig of RAM versus 4 gigs. That gives, when we did some testing, about 44% better performance in terms of some of the benchmark testing we have done with Antutu, for example. And we kind of saw that with this phone, is that, again, that extra 2 gig and A16 Bionic chip performs really well. And the other thing to mention with this phone, the newer type of memory is on the 14 Pro, which is the LPDDR5. Just means a faster way to multitask and saving stuff with it. So what do you have going for the 12 mini? As we mentioned, the 12 mini, again, it's a compact phone, so if you don't like those huge phones, this is where the 12 mini comes in handy and flavorful for most people. Of course, we mentioned the actual size difference and the weight, of course, around 70 grams less than the 14 Pro. So that's kind of the fair comparison between both of these two phones. Is it worth upgrading from the 12 mini to the 14 Pro? Of course it is, because of all those advantages that you get. And now it all going to depend, if you're in the market for both of these phones, which one should you go for? Again, it's going to come down to pretty much your size, and if you really care about those minor and some of the bigger differences we mentioned in this video. So hopefully you guys found this video helpful, and we want to hear from you guys. If you guys have used both of the phones or used one of them, what's your experience have been like? Leave a comment in the comment section, and thanks for watching, guys. See you guys next time.